we have to maintain the confidence in the system because it's a voluntary system of payment of our taxes.
Agreed.
And because it erodes the confidence of the American people in a system where they participate voluntarily.
That's a word euphemism we use. We use voluntary compliance when we talk about traffic signals. Most people at 2 o'clock in the morning, do you stop at a red light?
Yeah.
Is there a cop there?
Sometimes I don't.
Well, I do, and most of us do. Most of us do.
Right.
But that's voluntary compliance.
It's a voluntary system of payment of our taxes.
Agreed.
I don't think we force people.
Taxation is not forceful?
Well, no.
It's voluntary?
In fact, quite to the contrary. Our system of government is a voluntary tax system.
Oh, if you don't want to pay your taxes, you don't have to?
Oh, of course you have to pay your taxes.
It's probably ultimately damaging to the sense of voluntary compliance, which underlies our entire tax system.
It is not an act of against someone's will, because people are voting for people in office, establishing a government, giving that government power to self-govern and to do things that the public needs. So in that sense, it's very much a voluntary act.
I believe, Congressman, it's internalized, and the vast majority of our folk are hardworking, incredibly honest people. I'm going to tell you, and you guys should hear, that as these discussions occur, it's damaging to the morale of those people. It's probably ultimately damaging to the sense of voluntary compliance, which underlies our entire tax system.
Most citizens are not required to file an income tax return. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution is a fraud, and if you file, you waive your Fifth Amendment rights. I said, okay, that's some of the stuff she was saying. Now, this is a lot of reading. But I kept reading because I was very interested, being a CPA and into fraud and all that. I wanted to see what was going on. So here in the third column, it says no one has been able to collect the $50,000 reward offered by Bill Conklin to anyone that can identify the section of the Internal Revenue Code that makes a typical worker liable for the income tax. I'm serious about winning this $50,000. Okay, so it's at my desk. Basically, I just shoved everything off my desk and got the codes out, the regulations out, the tax guide. I got on the internet to look at the Cornell University site, all these different things, and I started researching. And 2 weeks later, I said to myself, oh my goodness, we have a problem here. It doesn't look like I'm going to win this money. And I was sitting there at my desk thinking, this thing is a fraud. 2 weeks it took me to sit there and realize that. I didn't just look at the positive, I looked at the negative, I looked at the IRS site. All these things are going on. This thing is a fraud. Being a CPA and a former IRS agent, I sat there at the desk, I was by myself, and all these thoughts started going through my head. The first thought was, now I'll finally open up the codes and regulations. Because see, at the IRS, they trained us with these little guides. We didn't use the codes and regulations. We would get one of these, and you would have to read it, understand it, and pass this little test. And all these little guides that I got, I read them, and I made A's on all my tests. And I thought, and I guess the rest of the agents in training thought, that the information that was in here was the same that was in those thick codes and regulations. But it's not necessarily the same. The things that are in these training manuals are not necessarily the same thing as in the codes and regulations. I just assessed it. So this is a notice of levy. And someone said, hey, this is a notice of levy. This is what the banks get, or your job or whatever. They said, look at the back of it. So I'm looking at the back of this notice of levy, and it says, Section 6331, levy and distraint. And then it says B and C. And I'm thinking, it starts off with B? What happened to A? So I looked up A. And here's A. And it says, levy may be made upon the accrued salary or wages of any officer, employee, or elected official of the United States, the District of Columbia, or any agency or instrumentality of the United States or the District of Columbia by serving a notice of levy. I'm thinking, but that's not most people. That's not the person that works at AT&T or Bell South or Coca-Cola. That's not most people. Aren't people noticing that the A isn't on here? Aren't they curious about it? Why are they doing this? All this is going through my head during this period of time, then I'm realizing that there's a rat in the camp. That's what I call it. But this is the straw that broke the camel's back. The Federal Reserve is not federal. How many of you did not know before today that the Federal Reserve isn't federal? If you didn't, don't be shy. If you didn't know before today that the Federal Reserve isn't federal, raise your hand. Most people don't know that. 9 out of 10 people that I asked off the street don't understand that the Federal Reserve is a non-auditable private banking cartel. They are collecting $36 million an hour in interest from the American people. $36 million an hour in interest from the American people. How are we going to run the country without the income tax? I don't know how much Dan got into it, but the Grace Commission report that Ronald Reagan put out in 84, says that none of the money collected in income tax goes towards running the country. But the bottom line is it's not going towards running the country, so you patriotic people out there, you've been fooled. Beardsley Rummel, he was Federal Reserve Chairman back in 1946, did a speech before the American Bar Association. The title of his speech was Taxes for Revenue Are Obsolete. Within the body of this report, he says that the taxes, the income taxes for redistribution of wealth. Another question that they ask me is, how come I haven't heard this on TV or on the radio or in the newspaper? Well, sweetie, the simple answer to that is the same people who own the television stations and the newspapers and the radio stations are the same people who are involved with the Federal Reserve. And here is a little statement that says that it only requires 5% ownership to significantly influence the media. Rockefeller is one of the original shareholders of the Federal Reserve. As early as 1963, the House Banking Subcommittee reported that Rockefeller, through Chase Manhattan Bank, controlled 5.9% of the stock in CBS and the bank and gained interlocking directorates with ABC. They ask me, or they'll say something like, well, this just sounds like it's some kind of conspiracy theory. Y'all hear that a lot? Okay. But tell me this, what's the difference between a conspiracy and a strategy? Don't you understand that this is all by design? All this black, white stuff. You're white, I'm black, you know. You're Democrat, I'm a Republican. You know, y'all heard of divide and conquer before, right? Why y'all letting them do it to us? I never tell people to file a tax return. I never tell them not to file. I never tell people to pay taxes, and I never tell them not to pay. What I tell people is to do your own research, do your due diligence, and decide whether or not you're going to be a slave or get off the plantation. That's your choice. But the point is, if each of us understands where we are, who we are, and tries to do something about it, then we're going to get somewhere. This is a great country, but it's off track. And who's going to get it back on track? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.
So the bottom line, federal government is deceiving the American public about their income tax obligations, resulting in trillions of dollars paid through intimidation, illegal force, hundreds of billions, if not trillions, taken illegally. I just encourage you to not stand by while the media and the government demonize law-abiding citizens who know and assert their rights. Again, current events as an example. Let's speak up and defend them. I encourage people to pray frequently, asking God to heal and bless our country, obey the commandments, refrain from taking God's name in vain, be a good example to your fellow Americans. But anyway, so to answer your question, if you're confronted by an agent, usually the best thing to do is to not say anything to them. If whatever information you find, like if you get these copies that I have you and you do more research, you should just fill your file cabinets full of your research. You should document when you did it, where you found it, what you found, and keep it to yourself. And then even if you're confronted, don't just go, well, you're going to just have to hit the road, buddy, because I got this box of stuff that says you're full of it. It's not a good strategic move. The better move is to keep them guessing and get as much information as you can. Get a business card. Look at their badge. Don't confirm you even are who they're trying to look for. You don't have to talk to them, and that's the thing that people need to get through their heads. The thing about those poor people that have been harassed through all this Tea Party, Patriot stuff with the IRS, you don't have to get IRS permission to gather together and work for a cause. But that's, and I understand why people do it. They're trying to get this little organization and get things off the ground, but That's part of the problem. You're going to ask the IRS for permission, and you're talking about an evil agency that is against the Constitution. You do realize that it was Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels who wrote the Communist Manifesto. And there's 10 planks in it, and one of them is a graduated income tax, and the other is a central bank. The income tax system is not a darling of Thomas Jefferson. It's a darling of Karl Marx, okay? So it can't, no matter how much the government promises us, it's not going to morph into something decent.